Why is Donald Trump suddenly battling Brazil? In July 2025, he announced a sweeping package of tariffs on Brazilian goods. On the surface, that might not seem too surprising. After all, Trump has made a habit of targeting other countries with steep trade penalties. But this time, something is different. These tariffs aren't just about economics. They're aimed at achieving a very specific political goal. And to many, this is nothing less than outright interference in Brazil's internal affairs. So, what exactly is going on, and why could this move have consequences that reach far beyond the United States and Brazil? Hello and welcome, I'm James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict and security. At the heart of modern international relations lies the principle of sovereignty, the idea that states have the right to govern themselves without outside interference. While countries may often try to shape one another's behaviour through diplomacy or persuasion, coercive pressure, whether military, political or economic, is widely seen as crossing a line. This includes using trade tools like sanctions or tariffs to influence another country's domestic affairs. But while the United States has a long history of interfering in Latin American politics, it's generally maintained a more respectful and cooperative relationship with Brazil, at least until now. So, why the sudden turn? To put everything in perspective, it's worth taking a quick look at Brazil's background. At over 8.5 million square kilometres or 3.3 million square miles, the Federative Republic of Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world by area. It's also the sixth most populous, with more than 210 million inhabitants. Rich in natural resources from oil to iron ore and a major agricultural exporter, Brazil ranks as the world's 10th largest economy and the third largest in the Americas after the United States and Canada. To understand how we got here, we need to look at how Brazil emerged and how its relationship with the United States developed over time. Brazil's story, at least in its modern form, begins in 1500 when it was colonised by Portugal. Unlike much of the rest of South and Central America, which came under Spanish imperial rule, Brazil evolved along a different path. For over 300 years, it remained a key part of the Portuguese Empire, becoming a major centre of sugar and later coffee production, all of which was built on the labour of millions of enslaved Africans. But the key turning point came in 1808 when the Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil to escape Napoleon's invasion of their country. In 1821, the king returned to Lisbon, leaving his son Dom Pedro in charge. But when Portugal tried to reassert control over Brazil the following year, Dom Pedro declared independence and proclaimed himself emperor. But while Portugal objected, it lacked the means to fight back. As a result, Brazil became the only monarchy in South America, a status it retained until 1889 when a peaceful military coup ushered in a republic. From the start, the United States played a supportive role. In fact, it was the very first country to recognise Brazil's independence, a gesture that set a positive tone for the future. But although the power dynamic was clearly skewed towards the US, the relationship between the two countries was, at least by 19th century standards, relatively cooperative. Unlike Washington's role in other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, where it often intervened, US-Brazil ties tended to be grounded in diplomacy and trade, and not force. This carried over into the 20th century. For instance, during the Second World War, Brazil proved to be a loyal ally. In addition to hosting US military bases that provided a vital transport link for ships crossing the Atlantic, it was the only Latin American country to send combat troops to fight in Europe. In return, the United States helped support Brazil's industrialization, laying the groundwork for closer economic ties between the two countries. But this relatively smooth relationship that had evolved over the previous century would come to be tested during the Cold War. In 1964, Brazil's left-leaning president, Jair was overthrown in a US-backed military coup. The resulting dictatorship, which would last until 1985, aligned itself with Washington's anti-communist agenda, and in return the US largely ignored its authoritarianism and political repression. But yet, despite this, over time, the two countries began to drift apart. By the 1970s, Brazil's military leaders were asserting greater independence, pursuing a nuclear agreement with West Germany despite US objections, and resisting pressure from the Carter administration over its human rights record. Meanwhile, Brazil even began engaging more openly with the non-aligned movement and advocating for the Global South. In 1985, Brazil finally returned to civilian rule. But while the United States supported the transition, with the Cold War ending and new global priorities emerging, Washington's attention was increasingly focused elsewhere. However, by the 1990s, there was a new impetus for cooperation. Under Presidents Collor and Cardoso, Brazil embraced market liberalisation, opening the door to even closer economic cooperation with the United States. But while relations were broadly friendly, Brazil continued to pursue its own path, championing regional integration through Mercosur, the Southern Common Market, a Latin American free trade bloc, and advocating for developing countries in global forums. All this would come to a head in 2003 when Brazil elected Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, better known as Lula, a left-wing former trade union leader. But while Lula kept to a fairly orthodox economic policy, thus maintaining strong trade ties with the United States, in foreign policy he struck an even more independent tone than his predecessors. In addition to playing a role in building the BRICS, a loose alignment with Russia, China, India and South Africa, he began challenging the US on key issues such as the Iraq War and building ties to US pariah states such as Venezuela, Cuba and Iran. While Lula left office in 2010 after 2 terms as president, the next major shift in US-Brazil relations came in 2019 with the election of a far-right populist, Jair Bolsonaro. From the start, Bolsonaro aligned himself closely with Donald Trump, who was then serving his first term as US president. As well as echoing Trump's rhetoric, Bolsonaro also adopted his general approach, attacking the media and railing against international institutions. Indeed, the relationship between the two men would become unusually personal. As they built close ties, Bolsonaro even endorsed Trump's 2020 re-election bid. And even after the vote, Bolsonaro publicly echoed Trump's baseless claims of electoral fraud. Refusing to acknowledge the result for several weeks, he was one of the last major world leaders to congratulate Joe Biden. But the situation took a darker turn after Bolsonaro lost Brazil's 2022 presidential election. Refusing to accept the result, which saw Lula win another term in office, he repeatedly cast doubt on its legitimacy and never formally conceded. In early 2023, his supporters stormed government buildings in the capital, Brasilia, in a failed attempt to overturn the outcome, an event widely compared to the January 6th Capitol riot in the United States. And it's that moment that underpins the current crisis. I hope you're finding this useful. If so, please do give it a like and don't forget to subscribe for regular updates on international relations. Thanks, and now back to the video. In May 2025, Bolsonaro was put on trial for multiple serious charges, including plotting a coup, inciting riots, abusing power and obstructing justice. At the same time, the Brazilian government has proposed new regulations targeting US-based social media companies, demanding transparency and accountability for the spread of disinformation. And it's against this backdrop that Trump has gone on the offensive. Claiming the charges against Bolsonaro are part of a political witch hunt, he's warned that unless Brazil halts the trial and softens its stance on social media regulation, the United States will impose 50% tariffs on Brazilian goods starting on the 1st of August. Although from Trump's perspective, this may be about standing by an old ally and protecting US tech interests, from a broader standpoint, it carries many risks. As one might expect, Brazilian officials, including the president, have denounced the move as unacceptable interference in Brazil's domestic affairs. But even more worryingly, the move could unravel a relationship that has, despite its ups and downs, remained largely cooperative over the past 2 centuries. While US support for the 1964 coup remains a dark chapter, the general trajectory of US-Brazil relations has been far more stable than with many of Brazil's neighbours. Indeed, Trump's actions could undo decades of trust and collaboration, especially in terms of trade and economic cooperation. But it doesn't stop there. It could also have broader regional and geopolitical implications. With a long history of interference in the internal affairs of many countries across Latin America, many in the region already see US policy as heavy-handed and self-serving. Trump's attempt to coerce Brazil into dropping charges against one of his political allies and pushing the interests of the United States' biggest companies will only confirm suspicions that Washington is up to its old tricks. Finally, Trump's threats could also push Brazil closer to China, Russia and the BRICS bloc. While some question whether a democratic Brazil truly belongs alongside the more authoritarian BRICS members, Trump's aggressive posture may leave the government with little choice but to strengthen those ties, especially if doing so ensures Brazil's strategic autonomy and shields the country from political pressure. At a time when the BRICS seems to be gaining ground and attracting new members, this could strengthen this emerging power bloc. And it's for all these reasons that Trump's threat to impose tariffs against Brazil is more than just a trade dispute. It's a dangerous political manoeuvre. Many will view it as a throwback to an earlier era of US policy when Washington was willing to violate the sovereignty of many countries, particularly those in Central and South America and the Caribbean. But while this approach may have worked in the 19th and 20th centuries and even during the Cold War, it poses far greater risks today. In the 21st century, many of these states have alternatives. Many would argue that Brazil is simply too large, too influential and too independent to be treated in this way. The question, of course, is that with just days to go before the imposition of tariffs, Trump will in fact back down. I hope you found that helpful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching and see you in the next video.